Amazon tried to crush us, I think, like 3 or 4 times, which was scary every single time they did it.
So if you look at the pipeline, John, and you're seeing that most of it's coming from paid demand gen, is that a potential red flag?
That's a huge red flag for me.
I have this theory that at scale, all B2C marketplaces will eventually just become advertising businesses.
Tell me more about that.
Uber, I think, and it's probably dated by now, but I think it was a year ago, they made 800 million on ads. If you're getting the supply side to bring you demand, that's like a total life hack.
Yeah, I mean, you tried to start one of these businesses. They're really hard to get going.
So hard.
But once you do, they're great. They're reinforcing.
What's the craziest thing you've done to get in front of a founder to potentially close a deal?
Probably the craziest thing I've ever done, but it was effective.
Can you talk about teachers pay teachers? I was looking into your portfolio, and that was one of the most fascinating models.
The stat that always gets people's attention is the time we sold the business, our top teacher was making about $1 million a month on the platform selling her content. So there was quite a bit of scale. People were making a lot of money doing this.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Welcome back to the Run the Numbers podcast, where we break down the strategies behind high growth businesses and the investors betting on them. Today, I'm joined by John Connolly, Managing Director at Spectrum Equity, where he focuses on internet, consumer, and education companies. We're kicking things off with how investing has evolved. What used to be considered gospel when John started 15 years ago, but now feels outdated, and how investor appetite for consumer companies has shifted in today's market. Then we dive into the art of consumer investing, why traditional SaaS metrics like net revenue retention don't always apply, what signals actually indicate a strong consumer business, and whether brand or product ultimately wins in the long run. And of course, we're looking at where the opportunities are now, what consumer business models still work in a high cost of capital world, what sectors might be undervalued, and how the way consumer companies monetize has changed over the last decade. Plus, John shares some behind-the-scenes stories, including what it took to land Teachers Pay Teachers, a really fascinating business, and the craziest thing he's ever done to land a deal. This one's packed with insights on the evolution of consumer investing. Let's get into it after a short word from our sponsors. I got a question for you. Is your billing system slowing you down? For most B2B SaaS companies, it's like a total mess. Manual invoices, revenue tracking workarounds, and endless spreadsheets that drain time and create errors. I've seen some ugly spreadsheets in my day. Your billing shouldn't feel like a never-ending math problem. That's where Subscript comes in, the modern billing and revenue recognition platform designed for SaaS finance teams that need both flexibility and accuracy. From automated invoicing and dunning to compliant, transparent revenue recognition and real-time analytics, Subscript eliminates manual work, reduces errors, and gives you a single source of truth for all your financial data. Finance teams using Subscript save over 20 hours a month. Wow. Closing the books faster and making smarter decisions with confidence. Don't let billing hold you back. Start scaling with ease. Learn more and book a free demo today at subscript.com. That's subscript.com. Tell me boy CJ sent you. They'll hook you up. Hey, metrics fans. Let me ask you something. Do you know what keeps CFOs and finance teams up at night? Well, it's not the complex analyses or forecasting models. It's the mind-numbing tasks of chasing receipts, reconciling expenses, and juggling 5 different systems just to track company spending. I was talking with a finance leader last week who calculated her team was spending an astonishing 20 hours weekly just on expense administration. That's nearly 1,000 hours annually on low-value tasks. That's why I'm excited to tell you about Rippling Spend. Rippling Spend is the only platform that automatically handles your entire company's spending in one unified system. What makes it different? It's built on Rippling's workforce platform. So when org changes happen, like someone getting promoted or changing departments, all approval workflows, access permissions, and policies update automatically. Picture this. When your marketing director goes on vacation, expense approvals don't sit in their inbox waiting for their return. Instead, they're automatically routed to the right backup approver. No manual delegation needed. Meanwhile, your finance team gets real-time visibility into all company spending with no more month-end surprises. As a Run the Numbers listener, you can get an exclusive demo showing exactly how much time your org would save. Just visit rippling.com/metrics to learn more. That's rippling.com/metrics. Do it, guys. Trust isn't earned, it's demanded. Whether you're a startup founder navigating your first audit or a seasoned security professional scaling your GRC program, proving your commitment to security has never been more critical or complex. That's where Vanta comes in. Businesses use Vanta to establish trust by automating compliance needs across over 35 frameworks, like SOC 2 and ISO 27001. Centralized security workflows, complete questionnaires up to 5 times faster, and proactively manage vendor risk. Vanta not only saves you time, it can also save you money. A new IDC white paper found that Vanta customers achieve $535,000 per year in benefits, and the platform pays for itself in just 3 months. Join over 9,000 global companies like Atlassian, Cora, and Factory, who use Vanta to manage risk and improve security in real time. For a limited time, our audience gets $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/metrics. That's vanta.com/metrics for $1,000 off. You've been at Spectrum for over 15 years. You've seen a lot of cycles. And I usually ask people what's some great advice you would give, but I'm actually wondering the opposite. I'm wondering if there's a piece of advice that was considered gospel when you started investing that maybe today would feel outdated, or you would be like, I wouldn't tell somebody that anymore.
Yeah, it's a good question. And, 15 years, I don't know how old you are, CJ, but like you do date yourself, like with the internet. Like, I mean, think it back. Like, I think Facebook went public in 2012. The iPhone came out in 2007. Netflix started streaming, I think 2007 too. So unfortunately, when you look back on the arc of my career, I was like early on all that stuff. And so back then, like what everybody was talking about was like hard assets. Like you got to have fiber in the ground. You got to have coaxial cable. You got to have like real stuff that you can underwrite, that you can leverage, that if things go bad, there's something to fall back on. And so I think like the common thing that's like stayed true to it all is defensibility. Like you got to have something unique and special about a company. But like what defensibility has meant historically and what it means today has like massively changed. So again, years ago, and it's funny, all that's old is new again. Like we were looking at data centers and racks and servers and power and electricity and all that stuff. And that was considered your IP. And then you migrated to the mobile age where it was about code and UI and UX, and those things just felt more squishy, but there was real defensibility around that stuff. Like that's been a big thing that's changed. And now that we're in the AI age, everybody's talking about hard stuff again with, whatever Oracle's spending on data centers, $500 billion and that kind of stuff. So again, all that's old is new again.
The world is kind of a pendulum in that sense. And it's also happening within like Anduril and these defense companies. Yeah. And it feels like there's a lot of money to be made if you can do something super hard that's vertically integrated with like real stuff, like actual atoms.
Yeah. Peloton had its moments in the sun too, where like they had great retention rates on that business. A lot of that was driven by the hardware that you had in the household. Now it had separate issues with it too, but hardware would have been a dirty word years ago. Wouldn't have been 15 years ago, probably was 5 years ago. And all these things have their inning and their series. So they come and go.
And you've had quite the track record in investing in consumer businesses. And I've spoken to a lot of CFOs from the likes of Strava, Headspace, and I actually tried to start a B2C marketplace back in the day, fell completely flat on my face. Yeah, it was tough. I learned a lot. But I have a soft spot for the consumer and the consumer founder coming out of that. Just like, I was like walking around on docks, talking to dock workers and stuff, like trying to make sales to get them on this marketplace of mine. But it feels like investor appetite for consumer businesses has cooled. Am I off base with that statement?
No, not at all. I feel like there are very few firms and very few investors who want to touch consumer today. And I think, we went from the world that we were in with free capital and everybody risk on to a world where it's risk off. And so there's just been a really, really hard pivot over to not wanting to touch consumer. Everybody wants rock solid net revenue retention businesses that candidly you probably won't look like a schmuck investing in, because if you got 110% NDR, like you're not going to take a step backwards. So like those businesses have just become very, very, very attractive to investors. And arguably they've always been attractive, but like it just feels like you mentioned a pendulum earlier. It really feels like it's swung really hard that way. And I might argue like a lot of the upside and maybe some of those high net dollar retention feels like it's priced out. Like those deals are getting priced so perfectly because everybody wants to do it. And I don't mean to be flippant, but they're kind of obvious. And when things become obvious, your returns, I think, therefore suffer. And it does feel like that's the environment we're in, where again, people are risk off. They have to deploy money, so they're putting it in the safe stuff. But that leaves a wide valley of consumer businesses that are having a hard time getting funding.
Man, the NDR piece hits home. We were talking to Reed Duramas on the podcast, and he was one of the growth leaders at Hulu, HBO Max, and then Substack. And he was saying, like, dude, like, before we get on the pod, like, I'm down to talk about retention, but can we not talk about net dollar retention? Because that's like not even in my vocabulary. Yeah. I'm like, yeah, that's fine. We won't bring it up. But it did make me think that they're like a whole different set of efficiency metrics for consumer businesses versus like if you're looking at a Snowflake or something.
Yeah, for sure. And, retention, like it's not all created equal. Like I would think, I don't know the specifics of Hulu, but like there's a difference between linear and nonlinear retention. Like a lot of consumer businesses have like very heavy churn in months 1 through 3, 1 through 6, because to use the Hulu example, I don't know, you want to watch The Handmaid's Tale. So you subscribe, you watch it, you binge, and then you're gone. But what's really important is that you see that nonlinear retention curve where some subset of the user base really values the subscription is going to stay forever. So it's the same concept as enterprise subscription where you're stacking cohorts over time. You just have to get through some noise in those cohorts to get to that steady base of users. And so with a lot of our companies, again, we spend more time kind of focused on the tail of retention and what that looks like when you're at renewal in month 12, month 24, month 36. And like, are you seeing some retentive characteristics there that are going to enable you to build a really strong base of business? That becomes super, super important. And then listen, with consumer businesses, I would argue it's kind of all about top of the funnel and how you efficiently reach new customers. There's a myriad of ways that you could do that. But I think that's where consumer businesses really like mark their differentiation and find a way to succeed. And then you got to have a big enough TAM, right? Like you can't have, 100 customers that you're selling to because you're going to go through those pretty quick. But the nice thing about consumers, you're selling to the entirety of the human population. So in most instances, that means a really big TAM. And then you got to marry the price you pay for the asset to the TAM that's available. So it's not totally surprising to me to hear the Hulu guys say that NDR wasn't a huge metric. But I do think you got to have some retention to build a good business.
And I think there are two types of retention. If we were being more nuanced about it in consumer businesses, they're like, do you have an onboarding problem where it wasn't a good fit and like they tried it out and didn't like it or they didn't see the value? And then that's where you see them drop off like within the first 30, 60 days. And then there's actually like a content and value problem of like, did I actually binge all of The Handmaid's Tale, to use your example? And I have no catalog left to watch. Those are like two fundamentally different problems.
For sure. And also, I just think with a lot of consumer businesses, there's parts of churn you will never be able to change. And I've seen countless companies bust their pick and spend tens, hundreds of millions of dollars trying to fix parts of retention that just, you can't change human psychology. You can't change certain human needs. And so there's kind of like no point. And so you got to embrace different users where they are, that like, yes, somebody may come in and binge a show, but that's okay. And did they leave with a good experience? Did they leave some sort of stored value in the product? Is it easy for them to reactivate? And like making things easier for people to come back, I think is important as well. So you gotta kind of bifurcate churn and understand like what's solvable and what's not. Like one of our investments was a company, SurveyMonkey, where a lot of people just had to send one survey, and that was totally fine. And we were never going to change that. And I wouldn't have gotten rid of that part of customers because that drove more virality for the product. It drove more top of funnel for us. But it did make churn look worse. But there wasn't much you could do about it. But if you stored the survey answers in SurveyMonkey, if you did various things, it provided these on-roads for people to come back and spend time with it again. So we've seen that across our consumer portfolio.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Here's a question. When was the last time you really had time to focus on growth and not chasing contract renewals, tracking shadow IT spend, or explaining rising software costs to the board? Yikes. The truth is, traditional spend management is broken. If you're still piecing together data from 5 different systems just to figure out what you're actually spending, while vendors keep on pushing those auto renewals and price hikes, my friend, I got a solution for you. That's where Tropic comes in. Tropic is an intelligent spend management solution that consolidates your spend data and processes into one unified offering, enabling insights and decisive action. It doesn't just show you where the problems are, it helps you solve them. From spotting hidden optimization opportunities like duplicative spend, to automating those painful procurement workflows, to giving you the best market data that turns every vendor negotiation in your favor. Tropic combines smart insights with real human expertise to keep you ahead of the curve. And I can say firsthand because I've used them for over 2 years. Their SaaS platform helps me with price checks. It helps me keep my calendar organized of when renewals are coming up, and I can actually visualize it. And let me say, it saves me more than 10 hours a week on vendor management, and we've saved a ton on renewals. I'm walking into the boardroom with a lot more confidence. Isn't it time to turn your spend management into your competitive advantage? Visit tropicapp.io/mostlymetrics. That's tropicapp.io/mostlymetrics. What does the future hold for business? Ask 9 experts and you'll get 10 answers. Bull market, bear market. Rates will rise, rates will fall. Can someone please just invent a crystal ball already? Until then, over 40,000 businesses have future-proofed their companies with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. Whether you're closing the books in days, not weeks, you're spending less time looking backwards and more time on what's next. If you listen to this podcast, you'll know I ask CFOs all the time to rep their tech stacks, and I would say almost every one of them use NetSuite. And that's what I would use too. Whether you're a company earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Speaking of opportunity, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/metrics. The guide is free to you. That is netsuite.com/metrics. Ooh, yeah, it's netsuite.com/metrics. Please, guys, I really need this. Ready to plan confidently, close faster, and report with accuracy? Here's what sets Planful apart. Imagine purpose-built solutions for every department, from FP&A to accounting, marketing to HR, all with built-in financial intelligence. It's easy to implement Planful in just weeks with minimal IT involvement, enabling seamless collaboration across your organization's key financial workflows. Best of all, Planful grows with you. Its unmatched scalability ensures that no matter how fast your business expands, Planful can keep up. See why over 1,500 customers worldwide choose Planful as their flexible, user-friendly, end-to-end financial performance management platform. Visit planful.com/metrics to see how you can elevate your team this year with Planful. They will hook you up. It is planful.com/metrics. Tell me your boy CJ saying planful.com/metrics. I think it was Shopify. I mean, they cater to like this micro business owner where like by design, a lot of them fail or they move on to a new idea.
Yeah.
And I think they were asking the chief product officer, like, how do you think about churn in that instance? Because I mean, the wider you go, the more it's actually going to suck.
Yeah.
And he said, I actually don't pay attention to it because I actually look at the churn as an at bat that we may not have had anyway.
100%.
Like it's all about the GMV that I can get. And if I have to churn a bunch and it's just part of the nature of doing business, that is what it is. And like looking at it that way kind of blew my mind as a person who just came from B2B software.
Yeah, and some people talk about it as like it's a necessary customer acquisition cost for your good customers. And I constantly talk about it like a farm system in baseball, where you got to get all these prospects in. You hope that some are good. You have the hypotheses on like, why somebody's going to be better than others. But at the end of the day, you don't totally know. And so you just have to kind of fill the pool with your prospect system with a bunch of people. And then some graduate up and some don't. And that's just the nature of the business. I mean, Shopify, for example, if you looked at their logo retention, it would be terrible by enterprise standards. But again, that's what makes their business work so well is they get these businesses early on. They're not generating very much GMV, and then something catches fire and it's a great customer for them. So that, very high churn that they see at the beginning is just a necessary part of doing business.
Do you think being honest about the TAM is even more important for consumer businesses than it is for B2B? Because to your point, if you can't expand the customer past a certain point, you need a lot of customers or a lot of runway.
Yeah, I think you really have to spend a lot of time focused on TAM. And in a lot of instances, I actually think people get TAM wrong where they think it's too small. And so really pushing your thinking about, okay, can this, the TAM at obvious first glance is X, but could this become Y? And that's where I think you create real value.
Can you say more about that? Because I think Uber is like the most canonical example of like thinking the TAM is one thing, but it's really even bigger.
Yeah, like we led an investment in a company called Teachers Pay Teachers, which was a marketplace where teachers bought and sold content from each other. And we were fascinated how big that business was able to become, because not only were they monetizing like the obvious stuff where teachers were selling to each other, we were then able to unlock schools where we were able to access like school budgets, and that increased the TAM. So it's things like that where the obvious how the business might be working today may not be how the business is working in 5 years. The other example I'd give you is with a lot of like prosumer businesses, and I'm invested in a business called Otter.ai, which does voice transcription. A lot of times it starts with an individual. And so you're underwriting like an individual TAM, but you're able to then grow into the enterprise. And so a lot of consumer businesses using PLG, which, everybody talks about that all the time, but like are able to kind of latch on and grow into the enterprise, even with their consumer roots. And so that would be another way to make TAM bigger.
I think Canva is an example of that. A lot of investors looked at first like, oh, this is a cute little tool for like moms to make birthday cards for their kids. And then next thing you know, they're worth 32 billion and they're selling to enterprises.
Yeah, and they're competing with Adobe. So that's a perfect example.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. You brought up NDR as potentially, I don't know, maybe we overweight it in terms of importance. Are there any metrics that you look to in consumer businesses that you're like, this is the most important thing to get right?
Yeah, I mentioned TAM. That's not really a metric, so I'll put that to the side. But the metric I look at the most with consumer businesses is like funnel and funnel health. So how much traffic are you attracting? And then more importantly, like how are you attracting that traffic? Is it paid? Is it organic? Is it branded search? Is it non-branded search? Is it your customers pumping the product yourself? Like there's a lot of nuance in that. And we spend a lot of time going pretty deep on that funnel and like understanding what's defensible in it and what's not. And I think you really, for consumer businesses to be successful, I think you have to have an unfair advantage there. So something in your funnel that's driving a flywheel, that's driving good organic customer acquisition, that could be brand, like something that's making your user acquisition very, very, very efficient is a key for consumer businesses, and probably what I spend the most time focused on.
So if you look at the pipeline, John, and you're seeing that most of it's coming from paid demand gen, is that a potential red flag?
That's a huge red flag for me. It's good while it's good, and then it's terrible when it's not. And so those economics can just erode really fast. I think they could be vital to like get a business going where you're spending on paid to, build your brand, get the flywheel going, get your first customers. But if you're overly reliant on paid acquisition, particularly at scale, boy, that can move against you super fast. And, unfortunately, I've seen that on numerous occasions where, new entrant enters the market. Google decides they want to do something. Like there's just a lot of ways that can break. And once it does, there ain't much you can do about it. So you're in a really tough spot.
Do you have to have a pretty good grip on your CAC payback period at the stage that you're investing in? Or is it more about like user activity and if they're coming back? Like, are you able to actually look at the unit economics at that level when you're investing early in a business?
Yeah, we are. I mean, we're growth stage investors, so our companies are at least 10 million in revenue, a lot of times north of there.
So they have real numbers on the users at that point.
Yeah, exactly. So there's enough there. If we were more in the venture world, you probably have to take a bit more of a bet there. But yeah, we're able to really see what the unit economics look like and are able to underwrite that. We passed on plenty of deals because it was too early. Like I remember we passed on the first Headspace round that another firm ended up doing because they actually hadn't been through a renewal cycle. Like we loved everything about it. We're like, man, something's really working here. There's a brand that's evident. All the economics look good, but they'd had like 4 cohorts that had been through a renewal cycle, and that just wasn't enough for us to underwrite. And so we ended up investing a couple of years later, but that was just too early for us to feel comfortable.
You mentioned having an unfair advantage. What do you think of some of these consumer brands that have partnered with celebrities like Honest Tea or the 50 things that Kylie Jenner is selling these days, or Mr. Beast Feastables? Do you think that's an actual competitive moat, or does that get diluted over time?
I think it can be a competitive moat. How sustainable it is, I think, is a big question. I mentioned Headspace earlier. We were the leader in the market, and Calm was coming up behind us. And I remember they got Harry Styles and Matthew McConaughey to record.
Yes, Matthew McConaughey. I remember that commercial.
Who wouldn't want Matthew McConaughey to read you to sleep? So it seems silly, but it actually drove an enormous amount of customer acquisition for them. Now, eventually, we wised up to it and started bringing some celebrities on our platform and some different voices than the founder. And so, again, it was a great advantage of them, but it was a pretty short window. Like, you can close those pretty quickly if you go out and get influencers on your platform as well.
Got it. And you'd mentioned brand a couple times there. Would you say that brand's even more important in B2C than it is in B2B?
Yeah, I definitely think it is. It's just distribution is so important. And so getting that brand right, getting something, again, where the top of the funnel is working for you, where people are talking about your product, where people are sharing the product, like that, all that goodness that comes with brand, you got to have some of that working for you in consumer. Otherwise, you're just paying your way to success. And as I said earlier, that works for a while until it doesn't. So you really need brand. And again, it could be virality in the product too, which isn't necessarily brand, but you got to have something working that's not paid to keep your flywheel going.
Yeah. I always wonder if like a strong brand can compensate for a weaker product in consumer, or if the best product will just always win in the long run.
It's a really good question. I don't think the best product always wins in consumer. I think there's a bunch of good products out there that just don't crack distribution. And so they stay lost in the app store forever. Don't get me wrong, like product is important. Product drives advantages. You really do want to have the best product, but you got to marry that with a really strong brand and top of the funnel to be successful in consumer. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's as cut and dry as products. More important, and products always going to win.
From some of the companies that you've invested in, which, if you could wrap your hands around brand and be like, this has some heft to it, which of those companies have the strongest brand, you think? Headspace
probably had the strongest brand at the time we did the investment. The reach that they were getting, the earned media they were getting. I mean, Andy Puddicombe, the founder of that business, he was on Oprah and the Today Show, and we weren't paying for those placements. Like, they just wanted a piece of Andy. And that was pretty incredible at the time. I don't think I'd ever seen anything quite like that. So that had a very strong brand, at least nationally. We've had other investments we've done where it had like local brand that was really strong. So I worked on our investment in a company called Seamless, which then became Grubhub, the online food ordering.
Oh, yeah.
And Seamless was huge in New York, and really actually got its start, interestingly enough, more on the B2B side, where investment bankers, lawyers, people staying too late at the office were using Seamless to order food at work, and it was subsidized by their employer. And then they had such a great experience doing it digitally versus paper menus that they were like, we'd love to use this at home. And so we became this whole thing in New York City and created a really, really big brand there that created just a juggernaut in New York that then created cash flow that enabled us to go expand into other markets. And ultimately, we ended up merging with Grubhub to create the largest delivery business in the U.S. at the time. But the brand in New York there was incredible.
I used Seamless a couple of times back in I think it was 2014, 2015 when I was working late at PwC in Boston, because I could put it on the through the brand's corporate card. And then next thing you know, you're with your friends over the weekend, watch a football game, you want to order wings. It's like, I already have an account.
That's exactly how it worked for us. When your employer's paying for free food, that's an easy motivator to create an account. And then you bring that home with you, and we got all that goodness going for us.
You've seen a number of evolutions in business models that consumer businesses will lean into. When you look back over the last 10 years, what's changed in the way that these companies monetize?
That's a really good question. I said earlier, all that's old is new again. I'm feeling that way right now with monetization as well, where If you think about kind of the early days of the internet, it was all ad driven. Like you couldn't get anybody to pay for subscriptions. And then people became disillusioned with that as a revenue model, like the predictability of subscriptions. So everybody pivoted over to subscriptions. I think there's a consumer fatigue with subscriptions and how many subscriptions.
Oh man, I feel it every time I look at my credit card. I'm like, I'm paying way more than I paid for cable.
Yeah, exactly. You see advertisements now where companies are like, we will help you cut your subscriptions. So that's not a good macro to be against. So I actually feel like ads have come back into the fore again, where we're seeing that more and more, that companies are realizing like, hey, we might have a big free user base. And again, we might have different tiers of users, some that are hyperactive that like will pay a subscription, some that are like moderately active where we maybe monetize in like with ads or with digital commerce or some number of different ways. But like companies are starting to become more creative. I think we're in the pretty early days of that. And truthfully, I think investors are just starting to get their heads around like, they got so used to underwriting subscription models. Like, how do we underwrite some of these other revenue models as well? But it does feel like that's happening.
I have this theory that at scale, all B2C marketplaces will eventually just become advertising businesses.
Tell me more about that.
So like if you think about Instacart, like the marginal dollars they can make from delivering a watermelon on the back of a bicycle versus having like Kroger's advertise on it, like dollar for dollar, I'd rather the ad dollars, but I can't have that without having the main thing be the main thing.
Yeah.
Same thing with DoorDash. Uber, I think, said, and it's probably dated by now, but I think it was a year ago, they made 800 million on ads, which like is kind of a drop in the bucket when you consider how much they make overall as a company. But 800 million as a standalone company is pretty sizable.
Yeah, for sure. And Amazon, same way. I mean, their ad business is absolutely enormous. And once you have the eyeballs of the customer and have real deep engagement with the customer, you're then able to like intercept that customer demand and send it numerous different places. If I was Google and places like that, like, your discovery for food, your discovery of different goods and services might have used to start on Google, but now it's starting on Amazon, starting on DoorDash, starting on Instacart. And advertisers want to be at that point of intercept to like reach the customer at the right time. So I think you're spot on.
Well, to bring it back to what you were saying, John, it was spot on about like pipeline health. If you're able to put the advertiser, the company selling a good on your marketplace further down the funnel in a spot where it's going to meet the consumer where they want to transact, like why would you want to pay Google AdWords to be like just out in the ether versus being further down the funnel?
Totally. That's exactly right. And you will also start to see like if that's such a preferred path for commerce or for merchants, they'll then start pumping your channel yourself. So you get flywheels happening there where like, actually, I don't want to send traffic to Google where I'm competing with 4 other, keywords that have been bid. Like I want to send it to this place or that place. And with a lot of our marketplace businesses, again, you saw this at Seamless, you saw this at Teachers Pay Teachers, where they would be pushing the site for you. And that was our unfair advantage. Like, we'd have stickers in restaurants that said, go to seamless.com to order, or teachers would have blogs that would say, hey, come to Teachers to Pay Teachers to get my content. And like that reinforcing mechanism just made the marketplace stronger. And then we were able to layer some ad businesses on top of that.
That's amazing. Can you speak to any network effects you've seen in B2C businesses more broadly? Because if you're getting the supply side to bring you demand, that's like a total life hack.
Yeah, I mean, you tried to start one of these businesses. They're really hard to get going. But once you do, they're great. They're reinforcing because what the merchants see is a lot of demand coming from these platforms. And so they want to up their profile on those platforms. They kind of get a taste and they're like, wow, like this is amazing. I can get orders from Seamless, or I can get new customers on Teachers Pay Teachers. Like, let me invest in that platform more. So they might pay for ads. They might place you more prominently on their website. They might put a sticker in their store, like all these different things that they realize like, wow, this is a really good customer experience. And that flywheel just reinforces itself and can make those businesses very, very hard to displace. I mean, at Teachers Pay Teachers, like Amazon tried to crush us, I think, like 3 or 4 times, which was scary every single time they did it, but they never could just because of the community and the flywheel that we had with that business.
We had interviewed Erica Gessert, the CFO of Upwork, and she was talking about how the workers on the platform are actually paying and buying points to advertise for their own services. Yeah. So they're monetizing that as well.
Yeah, for sure.
we did see this boom in consumer businesses during the ZERP era.
Yeah.
I mean, you could get like a box of meat delivered to your doorstep for like $3, and I think like in the back of our heads, we knew some of that was unsustainable. Many of them did struggle post 2021, and there was a bit of a reckoning, especially with like I said, the delivery companies and the likes. What types of consumer models are still compelling in a higher cost capital world? Like, is it a type of business, or is it like you just have to have good unit economics no matter what you do?
Yeah, well, and I don't think it was as simple as just the zero rate environment. COVID just like wreaked havoc on like consumer. And the reason I say wreaked havoc is because it just fundamentally altered consumer behavior that people didn't know what was normal, like what was a
Yeah, can you say more about that? Because there was this famous tweet about the Outback Steakhouse guy who was like complaining that he used to be able to get a steak and a blooming onion delivered to his house for like $28, and then after it went back to like 65. And it's like, no, dude, that was the normal. That before what you were doing wasn't normal.
Yeah, I mean, just like you used to have just so much more freedom of choice, and consumers were behaving in one way like before COVID, and then COVID happened and we were doing all kinds of different things. So like during COVID, you might have gone out to a nice restaurant, or excuse me, before COVID, you might have gone out to a nice restaurant. But with COVID, you can't. So like maybe it's like I do want to have a really nice steak at home and pay whatever amount of money for like, grass-fed beef delivered to my doorstep. And then when COVID stopped, like consumers had a real choice again. And I think a lot of investors, like, and ourselves included, like didn't know what was a sustainable trend versus like what was just a one-time blip with COVID. Like what had really fundamentally like altered consumer preferences and how they go about doing things versus, again, what was a more fickle, finite thing that consumers were doing. And so I think you saw a lot of, marry that with cheap capital at the time. It was like, oh my gosh, there's all this stuff happening in consumer. We've got all this free money, fund it. And then the two things like stopped at almost the same time. And so it was just like a perfect explosion to the negative for a lot of consumer businesses where capital dried up and then consumer behavior kind of quote unquote went back to normal. And so I think that's kind of what happened there. And so fast forward today, I think it's a real focus on just the fundamentals. Like, you can't spend your way to success in a lot of these categories. And that's what a lot of those businesses were doing. And so just a razor focus on unit economics. How are you acquiring your customers? How long do they stick with you? How do you drive top of the funnel? All the stuff we've already talked about.
I think the ultimate bull case for unit economics for consumer businesses at scale is Airbnb. Like if you look at how profitable they are, I think they have like 40% profit margins. I'll have to fact check myself on that one. But like I think people at first questioned, are you just using cheap money to prop up two sides of this with like subsidies and whatnot? But at scale, it actually rips.
It really should. Like, again, back to my example of like the flywheels going, like when you have your customers advertising like on your behalf and driving demand for you, that means you don't have to spend as much on marketing. And when you don't have to spend as much on marketing, like if you look at P&L of like enterprise SaaS businesses, like that's a big part of it. And so that's real margin in there that you should be able to get meaningfully profitable. Like I just invested in a consumer business that has 60% EBITDA margins. I had another one that had 55% EBITDA margins. And it's not like they're not growing. They're all growing well. But again, they've got that je ne sais quoi, like something special in their funnel that's making them operate that efficiently.
I think one of the most interesting consumer businesses out there is the farmer's dog.
Yeah.
Because like, I mean, think about the lifetime value. People love their pets. I mean, you could have a dog for 10, 12, 14 years if they live long enough. And like economy goes down. I think it's somewhat recession proof.
Yeah, we're investors in Rovers, so have exposure to your furry friends as well.
Rover's an amazing business. Isn't that like one of the only marketplaces where like it was super easy to get the normally hard side because people are always like, yeah, I'd totally watch a dog.
100%, yeah. Signing up supply there.
I know I worded that really poorly.
No,
like,
getting supply to that side of the marketplace was not difficult because people were like, what do you mean I can babysit a golden retriever for the weekend? Like, sure, sign me up.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, worked well.
Yeah, anything with pets in it, I'm long on.
For sure.
One more question I have about evaluating consumer businesses. is it harder to get these companies into like what investors hope for, like a one size fits all box to try to evaluate it? Like, do you have to look at each one pretty individually because a lot of them aren't subscription models, or because they may be going after a niche that's not like IT buyers like on the B2B side?
Yeah, I don't think what we look for at diligence is like terribly different. Again, the difference is you got to really understand the TAM, the total addressable market, and how big that is, and that's going to vary if you're going after hairdressers versus pets. So that'll vary, but the common characteristics around efficiency at top of the funnel, nonlinear retention, that is pretty consistent across all of them, in my opinion.
I'm biased as an operator, just thinking that investors are shoving all the information into a one size fits all box, even though I know it's not the case.
We probably are.
Yeah. I want to talk about the art of winning the deal. You've probably seen some stuff in your time. Probably hopped on a couple planes to meet with founders. What's the craziest thing you've done to get in front of a founder to potentially close a deal?
Yeah, like with where my firm Spectrum invests, we're looking for, our bread and butter deal is a bootstrap business that's never raised outside capital. So by definition, they don't want to meet with me. So we have to go to
That's hard mode, man.
Yeah,
Like
totally.
someone who's owned their business for 20 years and it's profitable. They're like, no, I'm not.
Yeah, 100%. And so I probably I don't know, it was the craziest thing I've ever done, but it was effective. There's a business called Kajabi, which is a platform where creators can monetize their knowledge and expertise and monetize their audiences better. And it was owned by one guy down in Southern California, and another guy who wasn't quite a co-founder, but worked really, really closely with him. Two great guys. They had said no to us forever. They were like, no, like this thing's generating a lot of cash flow. We love it. We want to be our own bosses, et cetera, et cetera. And so I just bought a ticket to their user conference and showed up uninvited and, milled about the conference and met people, met creators. And then ultimately, I'm way too old to do this. I took a selfie at the conference in front of the sign and said, hey guys, I've been here for the last 48 hours. This has been absolutely amazing. I met with person X and person Y, and what you're doing here is really cool. And they were just floored by that. They were like, that's awesome. You get our community, you get what we're trying to do. Let's have some margaritas and tacos next week and get together in Irvine. And one thing led to another, and we were ultimately able to invest in the company. But it's that kind of scrappy stuff that we're frequently having to do to try to show entrepreneurs that we really value their businesses, realize they've built something unique, and want to be partners with them in their next stage of the journey.
Well, on that note, because I think you are playing in hard mode to a certain extent, there's a certain group of founders who know that they need to be venture backed, they're going to burn money, and so they're knocking on every door. And then there's another group of founders who have something really great going, and they don't necessarily need to take capital. Well, what's usually your pitch to them to get them to see the light there? Because it's hard to get someone to move in that direction if they've been having success for so long on their own.
Yeah, it's super hard. And, maybe they'd be successful without us. But what we try to say is listen, we've seen scale before. We know what it takes to go from 10, 20, 30 million in revenue to hundreds of millions in revenue, and all the pitfalls along the way. So we can really help accelerate your growth and help you avoid some of the mistakes that you make. And then from a personal, financial risk reward standpoint, we can de-risk those founders and let them take capital off the table. And as I say, have 2 bites of the apple, take some liquidity now, buy your house, feel good about any lingering financial commitments, and then really be freed up to take a big swing. Because I think when there can be a dynamic with bootstrap founders where things are working really well, and you don't want to take a big risk because you don't want to, you got all your net worth on one thing. And so if you're able to take some money out, whatever the amount is, 20, 30, $40 million of capital, take it out, put it to the side, be okay, I'm set for life. Now I can really go try to build a multi-billion-dollar business. That tends to resonate with entrepreneurs in addition to the expertise that we bring.
Yeah, because it's not like that a founder who raises money from the start has nothing to lose. They're still giving up years of their career, blood and sweat. But there are also this breed of founders who have built it on their back, maybe with even their house tied to the success of the company. And to have that stress taken away, I imagine after many years building is definitely a good reason.
Yeah.
Can you talk about teachers pay teachers? I was looking into your portfolio, and that was one of the most fascinating models. Can you just explain how that worked again and maybe any cool stories that came out of the investment?
Yeah, Teachers Pay Teachers was a marketplace where teachers bought and sold their content and curriculum from each other. So if you think, CJ, you got really young kids, like maybe when they're a couple years older, you'll walk into a classroom and you'll be like, holy cow, like what's all this stuff on the walls? They're like doing different activities every day. A teacher in the classroom has to come up with all that stuff. And that's a ton of work, particularly for a new teacher who's entering the profession. And so the idea behind Teachers Pay Teachers, and a lot of this is what I love about the internet, is democratization of content. Like you think about what Wikipedia did, you think about what any podcasting, even like you can find expertise like anywhere. And so the idea was like, let's let teachers who create great content share that with the world and then monetize that. And so Teachers Pay Teachers was a marketplace that enabled that to happen. The stat that always gets people's attention is the time we sold the business, our top teacher was making about $1 million a month on the platform selling her content. So there was quite a bit of scale. And people were making a lot of money doing this. But what was really rewarding for me, I remember going to their user conference right after we had led the investment. And honestly, CJ, it was like a church revival, like going in there, seeing the impact that the platform had on people's lives. There was one woman that got so excited, jumping up and down, that she tore her ACL. So like it had sent somebody to the hospital. But like that was the kind of like enthusiasm that was in the room. And again, not everybody was $1 million a month teacher, but like, for a teacher getting an extra $2,000, $5,000, $30,000, like that really, really makes a difference. And seeing the impact that the company had on teachers' lives was personally very rewarding.
Thanks for telling that story. I wanted to try to pull something like that out of you because I do think it shines a light on the beauty of some of these consumer businesses. Like it actually helps people like at the individual level. It's not always as clear to tie the benefit in some of these B2B businesses.
Yeah, for sure. Like I think it was the one time and probably the only time in my career where myself and one of my partners were in tears and looking at each other like, don't tell anybody about this. But like hearing the stories that, again, the impact that we're having on people's lives, like all across the country, was pretty spectacular. And, again, you see that across Headspace, the stories and letters they get from users were so impactful. Even some like Grubhub and Seamless, like helping small businesses scale and reach more customers was pretty valuable.
And I think that's the mark of any amazing consumer business or consumer marketplace where you see people creating their own small businesses on it. We interviewed Chuck Fisher, the CFO of Turo, the peer-to-peer car marketplace. And he said, I have this guy that has over 1,000 cars, a fleet of 1,000 cars in California. Like he's running not just a small business, he's running a very large business.
Yeah, for sure. Like our top creators at Kajabi, make a lot of money every year, and they're micro businesses. Like, they've got employees and publicists and content creators, and it's pretty amazing. So you're definitely helping the small and medium sized business community with a lot of these platforms.
Well, thanks for coming on to talk to us about your investing career and more specifically the consumer space. It's something that I feel like isn't covered in great detail on a lot of the podcasts. Everyone wants to talk about the next cybersecurity company that's up and coming. But this has been a really fun one for me.
Of course, CJ. Thanks for having me on.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.